Stay informed, stay ahead. Subscribe now to USA Fresh News.
Today in USA Fresh News, good morning, and welcome to your Friday, September 19th, 2025 news briefing. Yesterday brought us unprecedented developments that are reverberating across the nation this morning. President Trump has escalated his attacks on media freedom, threatening that broadcast networks could lose their FCC licenses if they continue criticism of his administration, marking his most far-reaching threat to press freedoms yet. This came after ABC indefinitely suspended Jimmy Kimmel's late-night show, following direct pressure from Trump's FCC Chairman Brendan Carr, who called on broadcasters to stop airing the program. The move has sparked outrage from the ACLU and media freedom advocates who are calling it government-driven censorship. Corporate America's swift capitulation to Trump's pressure, particularly Disney's ABC and Nexstar affiliates, demonstrates the administration's growing influence over media companies seeking regulatory approval for mergers and licensing. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice continues its escalation of demands for sensitive voting data from Democratic-controlled states, with Trump planning to deploy National Guard troops for enhanced immigration enforcement operations. These developments represent a critical moment for American democracy, as institutions face unprecedented pressure from an administration determined to consolidate power and silence opposition voices.
So let's see, or listen. The morning of September 19, 2025, finds America grappling with what many constitutional scholars are calling the most serious threat to press freedom since the Nixon era. Yesterday's events have sent shockwaves through newsrooms, corporate boardrooms, and civil liberties organizations across the nation, as President Trump's administration demonstrates an unprecedented willingness to weaponize federal regulatory power against media critics. The crisis began when FCC Chairman Brendan Carr, appointed by Trump in his second term, issued what amounts to a regulatory ultimatum to broadcast networks. In a series of statements that would have been unthinkable just years ago, Carr explicitly threatened to revoke broadcast licenses for networks that continue to air content critical of the Trump administration. The target was clear: late-night comedy shows, particularly those hosted by comedians who have made Trump a frequent subject of their monologues. ABC's response was swift and capitulatory. Within hours of Carr's pronouncement, the network announced the indefinite suspension of Jimmy Kimmel Live. The speed of this decision reveals the extent to which media corporations now operate under the shadow of regulatory retaliation. Disney, ABC's parent company, has significant business interests that require federal approval, including theme park regulations, streaming service policies, and international broadcasting rights. The company's executives, it appears, calculated that protecting Kimmel was not worth risking these broader corporate interests. The implications of this decision extend far beyond one television show. Legal experts note that the First Amendment has traditionally protected media content from direct government interference, with the Supreme Court establishing in cases like New York Times versus Sullivan that even harsh criticism of public officials enjoys robust constitutional protection. However, the broadcast television industry operates under a different regulatory framework than print media, requiring FCC licenses that must be renewed periodically. This regulatory vulnerability has now been weaponized in ways that the framers of communication law never anticipated. Jimmy Kimmel himself has remained largely silent since the suspension, though sources close to the comedian suggest he is consulting with First Amendment attorneys about potential legal challenges. The situation puts him in an impossible position. Challenging the suspension could result in further retaliation against ABC and potentially other networks, while remaining silent validates the administration's censorship tactics. The response from other late-night hosts has been notably cautious. Stephen Colbert, Trevor Noah's successor, and Saturday Night Live's current cast have all scaled back their Trump-focused content in recent weeks, apparently anticipating this exact scenario. Industry insiders describe a climate of self-censorship that has already begun reshaping comedy programming across television. Corporate America's broader response to Trump's media pressure campaign reveals a concerning pattern of preemptive compliance. Nexstar Media Group, which owns more local television stations than any other company, immediately circulated internal memos instructing news directors to avoid editorial content that could be construed as politically biased. The company's decision reflects the reality that local broadcast stations are particularly vulnerable to FCC pressure, as their licenses are more frequently subject to renewal challenges and community complaints. The ACLU's response has been swift and unequivocal, with Executive Director Anthony Romero calling the Kimmel suspension government censorship by proxy. The organization has announced plans for an emergency lawsuit challenging the FCC's authority to make licensing decisions based on content criticism. However, legal experts warn that such challenges could take years to resolve, during which time the chilling effect on media content will continue to grow. This media crackdown occurs against the backdrop of other concerning developments in Trump's second-term agenda. The Department of Justice has intensified its demands for sensitive voting data from Democratic-controlled states, ostensibly as part of investigations into alleged election irregularities. States like California, New York, and Illinois have resisted these demands, citing voter privacy concerns and arguing that the requests represent fishing expeditions designed to intimidate political opposition. The DOJ's approach represents a significant escalation from typical federal-state cooperation on election matters. Traditional requests for voting data focus on specific allegations of fraud or irregularities, while the current demands appear to seek comprehensive voter information without clear justification. Legal experts note that this data could potentially be used to create detailed profiles of Democratic voters, raising concerns about future voter intimidation or suppression efforts. Simultaneously, the administration has announced plans for enhanced immigration enforcement operations that would deploy National Guard troops in support roles. While the military cannot directly participate in civilian law enforcement under the Posse Comitatus Act, the Guard can provide logistical support, transportation, and other assistance to immigration and customs enforcement operations. This represents the largest planned use of military resources for immigration enforcement in decades. The National Guard deployment plan has already sparked pushback from several Democratic governors who retain authority over their state's Guard units unless they are federalized. Governors in California, New York, and Massachusetts have indicated they will resist such deployments, setting up potential constitutional confrontations over state versus federal authority. These standoffs could ultimately require Supreme Court intervention to resolve questions about the limits of federal power over state military units. The economic implications of this political turbulence are already becoming apparent. Stock prices for major media companies have shown increased volatility as investors try to assess the long-term impact of regulatory pressure on content decisions. Disney's stock fell 3% following the Kimmel suspension announcement, while other media conglomerates have seen similar declines. The uncertainty extends beyond entertainment companies to any business with significant regulatory exposure, as investors question whether other industries might face similar political pressure. The ramifications of yesterday's events extend into the very fabric of American democratic institutions. The speed with which ABC capitulated to federal pressure represents a watershed moment that future historians may mark as the beginning of a new era in government-media relations. Unlike authoritarian regimes that directly seize control of media outlets, the Trump administration has discovered that the existing regulatory framework provides sufficient leverage to achieve similar results through economic pressure and licensing threats. The entertainment industry's response has been telling in its diversity. While some celebrities have spoken out against the Kimmel suspension, many others have remained conspicuously silent, apparently calculating that speaking out could jeopardize their own careers and projects. This self-censorship dynamic extends beyond late-night television to movies, streaming content, and even social media, where entertainment figures are increasingly cautious about political commentary. International observers have noted disturbing parallels between current American developments and historical patterns of democratic backsliding in other countries. The European Union has already begun discussing potential media freedom assessments of the United States, typically reserved for countries with questionable democratic institutions. This unprecedented step reflects growing international concern about America's commitment to press freedom and democratic norms. The economic pressure tactics being employed represent a sophisticated understanding of how modern media conglomerates operate. Unlike independent news organizations that might resist government pressure, today's media landscape is dominated by large corporations with diverse business interests, extending far beyond journalism or entertainment. These companies are particularly vulnerable to regulatory retaliation, because their business models depend on government approvals for mergers, spectrum allocations, international expansions, and countless other regulatory decisions. State governments controlled by Democrats have begun coordinating their resistance to federal overreach, but their options remain limited. While states retain significant authority over many areas of governance, broadcast licensing and immigration enforcement fall squarely within federal jurisdiction. The most effective state resistance may come through economic measures, such as reconsidering tax incentives for media companies that comply with federal censorship pressure. The legal challenges ahead promise to test fundamental constitutional principles that have remained largely theoretical until now. The Supreme Court has never ruled definitively on whether the government can use regulatory leverage to indirectly accomplish what it cannot do directly through legislation or executive action. Lower courts have generally found such tactics unconstitutional, but the current Supreme Court's conservative majority may be more sympathetic to executive power arguments. Civil liberties organizations are mobilizing resources for what they anticipate will be a multi-year legal battle. Beyond the immediate Kimmel case, they are preparing challenges to the DOJ's voting data demands and the planned National Guard deployments. The breadth of these challenges reflects the comprehensive nature of the administration's approach to consolidating power and marginalizing opposition voices. The international implications of these developments cannot be understated. America's soft power has long depended on its reputation as a beacon of democratic values and press freedom. Countries that have previously faced American criticism for authoritarian tendencies are already pointing to current events as evidence of American hypocrisy. This erosion of moral authority weakens America's ability to promote democratic values internationally and strengthens authoritarian regimes worldwide. Corporate boardrooms across America are grappling with unprecedented decisions about how to respond to political pressure. The business community generally prefers stability and predictability, but the current environment forces companies to choose sides in ways that could have lasting consequences for their operations and profitability. Some companies are quietly developing contingency plans for operating under increasingly authoritarian conditions, while others are considering relocating operations to more politically stable environments. The technology sector faces particular challenges as social media platforms come under increasing scrutiny for their content moderation policies. The same regulatory leverage being used against broadcast television could potentially be applied to internet platforms, creating new pressures for censorship of political content. Major tech companies are already adjusting their policies in anticipation of potential government retaliation.
Sports. While America grapples with constitutional crises and political turmoil, the sports world provides both welcome distraction and its own set of compelling narratives that reflect broader cultural and economic trends. This Friday morning brings us significant developments across multiple sporting landscapes that demonstrate how athletics continue to serve as a mirror for American society. The NFL season enters its third week with storylines that extend far beyond the gridiron. The Kansas City Chiefs' pursuit of an unprecedented third consecutive Super Bowl championship has captured national attention, with Patrick Mahomes demonstrating why he's considered the league's premier quarterback. Last night's Thursday night football matchup between the Denver Broncos and Los Angeles Chargers showcased the AFC West's competitive depth, with rookie quarterbacks Bo Nix and Caleb Williams proving that the league's future remains bright despite ongoing concerns about player safety and concussion protocols. The economic impact of NFL success cannot be understated. Kansas City's championship runs have generated an estimated $500 million in local economic activity over the past 2 seasons. from increased tourism to merchandise sales and restaurant revenue on game days. This economic boost has become particularly significant as cities across the Midwest compete for relevance in an increasingly polarized national landscape. Basketball enthusiasts are buzzing about the approaching NBA season, with training camps opening next month. The Boston Celtics enter as defending champions, but the offseason moves by teams like the New York Knicks and Philadelphia 76ers have dramatically shifted championship expectations. The league's continued global expansion efforts have taken on new significance given current international tensions, with NBA games in London and Paris serving as soft diplomacy tools when traditional diplomatic channels face strain. The WNBA concluded its regular season this week with record-breaking viewership numbers that reflect changing attitudes toward women's professional sports. Caitlin Clark's rookie season with the Indiana Fever has been nothing short of transformative, not just for her individual franchise but for the entire league. Her impact extends beyond basketball courts into boardrooms, where television executives are renegotiating broadcast deals and sponsors are dramatically increasing their investments in women's athletics. Tennis fans are still processing the aftermath of the U.S. Open, where American players showed surprising strength across both men's and women's draws. The success of homegrown talent has renewed discussions about youth development programs and the role of public courts in nurturing future champions. These conversations take on added significance as municipal budgets face pressure from other priorities, making sports infrastructure investments increasingly political decisions. Major League Baseball enters its final stretch with playoff races that have rejuvenated fan interest in markets that had grown complacent. The Baltimore Orioles' surprising competitiveness has demonstrated how smart organizational management can transform franchises rapidly, providing hope for long-suffering fan bases in cities like Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. The economic ripple effects of successful baseball teams extend throughout their regions, from increased property values near stadiums to higher tourism revenues during playoff runs. College football continues to navigate the chaotic landscape of name, image, and likeness deals and conference realignment. The recent moves by Oregon and Washington to the Big Ten Conference represent seismic shifts that prioritize television revenue over traditional geographic rivalries. These changes reflect broader economic pressures facing higher education institutions, where athletic departments serve as crucial revenue generators that help subsidize academic programs. The upcoming Paris Olympics preparations have taken on additional complexity, given international political tensions. American athletes find themselves in the unusual position of representing a country whose democratic institutions face unprecedented scrutiny. The traditional role of Olympic competition as a showcase of national values becomes more complicated when those values themselves are subjects of intense domestic debate. Golf's ongoing Saudi-backed Live Tour controversy continues to divide the sport, with players facing difficult choices between financial incentives and traditional tour loyalties. These decisions reflect broader questions about American sports' relationship with international funding sources, particularly from countries with questionable human rights records. Soccer's growing popularity in America has accelerated through strategic franchise placement in emerging markets. MLS expansion into cities like Austin and Nashville has proven successful, demonstrating how professional sports can help define urban identity and civic pride. The league's emphasis on soccer-specific stadiums has created architectural landmarks that serve as community gathering places beyond game days. The intersection of sports and politics remains unavoidable, with athletes increasingly comfortable using their platforms for social commentary. This trend reflects generational changes in how public figures view their responsibilities to address societal issues, even when such positions risk alienating portions of their fan bases.
Weather. As September progresses toward autumn's official arrival, America's weather patterns reveal a complex tapestry of climate extremes that underscore both seasonal transitions and longer-term environmental shifts, reshaping the national landscape. This Friday morning brings meteorological developments that extend far beyond simple temperature and precipitation forecasts, touching on economic disruptions, agricultural concerns, and infrastructure challenges that define modern American life. The Atlantic hurricane season continues its active pace, with Tropical Storm Gabrielle maintaining strength over the central Atlantic. While current projections suggest the system will remain offshore, meteorologists are closely monitoring upper-level wind patterns that could potentially steer future storms toward the eastern seaboard. This season has already produced 7 named storms, placing 2025 slightly above the historical average, but well within the range of increasingly active hurricane seasons that have characterized the past decade. The economic implications of hurricane preparedness extend throughout coastal communities from Maine to Florida. Insurance companies have already adjusted their risk models based on early season activity, with homeowners in vulnerable areas facing premium increases that reflect the new reality of intensified storm patterns. The psychological impact of constant storm monitoring has created what meteorologists term hurricane fatigue, where coastal residents become desensitized to evacuation warnings, potentially increasing future casualty risks. Across the interior United States, drought conditions continue to challenge agricultural producers in ways that ripple through global commodity markets. The Corn Belt states of Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana face soil moisture deficits that threaten late-season crop development, while ranchers in Texas and Oklahoma continue destocking cattle due to inadequate pasture conditions. These agricultural stresses contribute to food price inflation that disproportionately affects lower-income families, creating social tensions that extend beyond rural communities. The Pacific Northwest experiences an unusual weather pattern this week, with persistent high-pressure systems creating unseasonably warm temperatures that stress regional power grids. Seattle and Portland have recorded temperatures exceeding 85 degrees Fahrenheit, well above seasonal norms, and creating cooling demands that strain electrical infrastructure designed for the region's typically moderate climate. Energy companies are implementing voluntary conservation programs while preparing for potential rolling blackouts if demand continues exceeding supply capacity. Wildfire conditions across California and the Mountain West remain critically dangerous despite recent containment successes. The combination of low humidity, persistent winds, and accumulated dry vegetation creates tinderbox conditions that require constant vigilance from firefighting resources. The economic cost of wildfire suppression has already exceeded $2 billion nationally this year, with significant additional expenses for property damage, evacuation costs, and long-term environmental remediation. Air quality concerns extend far beyond active fire zones, with smoke plumes affecting major metropolitan areas, including Denver, Salt Lake City, and Phoenix. These conditions create public health emergencies that strain hospital systems already dealing with respiratory illness increases. The intersection of wildfire smoke and urban air pollution creates compound health risks that disproportionately affect elderly residents and those with pre-existing conditions. The Great Lakes region experiences unusual temperature variations that confuse both residents and wildlife populations preparing for seasonal transitions. Early ice formation on smaller lakes has disrupted migration patterns for waterfowl, while unusually warm periods have extended growing seasons for some crops, while stressing others adapted to consistent cooling trends. These disruptions cascade through regional ecosystems in ways that scientists are still working to understand. Urban heat island effects have intensified across major metropolitan areas, with cities like Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Dallas recording overnight temperatures that failed to drop below 80 degrees Fahrenheit. This sustained heat stress increases energy consumption for cooling, strains electrical grids, and creates dangerous conditions for homeless populations and outdoor workers. City planners are accelerating tree planting programs and cool roof initiatives, but these long-term solutions provide little relief for immediate conditions. The economic implications of extreme weather extend throughout supply chain networks, with transportation delays affecting everything from agricultural products to manufactured goods. Railroad companies report track buckling issues in extreme heat, while shipping delays on major rivers affect grain exports crucial to international trade relationships. These disruptions contribute to inflationary pressures that complicate Federal Reserve monetary policy decisions. Climate adaptation strategies are becoming central to municipal planning processes, with cities investing in infrastructure upgrades designed for weather patterns that differ significantly from historical norms. Stormwater management systems, electrical grid hardening, and emergency cooling centers represent billions of dollars in necessary investments that compete with other municipal priorities for limited budget resources. Agricultural adaptation efforts include crop variety development, irrigation system modifications, and livestock management changes that help producers cope with increasingly unpredictable weather patterns. These adaptations require significant capital investments that strain farm finances already pressured by commodity price volatility and supply chain disruptions.